Hello and welcome to this Deakin University alumni webinar presented by Damien Manuel. Sam Johnston here from the Deakin Alumni Relations team. It's great to have you with us. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we're broadcasting today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and to pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Today we're broadcasting from Deakin's Burwood campus, and our webinar topic is From Phishing Scams to Identity Theft. Are you safe from cybercrime? To watch past webinar and seminar recordings, visit the Webinars and Resources page on the Deakin Alumni website. Today's webinar will be recorded and posted online and will be available in approximately 3 weeks under the Faculty of Science, Engineering and Built Environment section of the page. Damien Manuel's interest in security was sparked at the age of 11 when he was part of a hacker collective. He is now Director of Deakin's Centre for Cybersecurity Research and Innovation and holds a range of senior positions on boards of national and international security and IT groups. Damien also mentors entrepreneurs through CyRise, Australia's only cybersecurity startup accelerator, and has established information technology community resource centres to improve literacy and skills in Kenya, Laos, Uganda and Cambodia. Damien joins us today from overseas. Thank you so much for making time for us today, Damien, and for getting up so early. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam. It's great to be here to give a presentation on cybercrime and some of the things that are happening. I'm dialing in from Lithuania, where I'm actually investigating and sort of working with the government here around misinformation campaigns that they suffer from Russia. As we go on to the next slide, I've just got a brief agenda to give you a bit of a rundown of some of the things that we'll cover during the talk. So we'll look at human behaviour and critical thinking. I'll cover who these hackers are and sort of the different motivations that drive them. We'll talk about some of the common attacks and some of the common scams that are used as well. And we'll also spend some time thinking about how to be a hacker and the kind of mindset that hackers have. We'll also briefly cover why data is considered the new oil and how information is gaining greater and greater importance. I'll also cover a couple of tips about staying safe online. As we go to the next slide, the first thing that we're going to do though is we're going to play a little bit of a quick game, and I want you to play along sort of from a true and false perspective and record down which answers you're getting right and wrong. And we're going to ask a number of questions, and really I want you to think about whether those questions are true or false, and then we'll have a little bit of poll as we go through so you'll be able to respond online, and then we can talk about why some of these things are true and why some are false as well. So the first question: the Great Wall is visible from space. So we'll pop up a poll now, and if you can select true or false, we'll give you a couple seconds to submit your responses. And then hopefully that's enough time for most of you to select either true or false, that the Great Wall of China is visible from space, and we'll see what the results are. And so we've got a mixture. So 40% of you are saying true and 60% are saying false. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. And the next question is: Mount Everest is the tallest mountain from the base to the summit. So again, we'll do a quick poll. So Mount Everest is the tallest mountain from the base to the summit. Again, select true or false. And we'll have a look now to see what the results are. And as you can see, we've got about 52% saying true and 48% saying false. And we'll have a look at the next question. And the next question in: giraffes are mammals that can't jump because they're such a large animal, very awkward with their big necks. So giraffes are mammals that can't jump. If you can select true or false. And we'll have a look at what the responses are now. Okay, so we've got 33% saying true, that giraffes are mammals that can't jump, and 67% saying that that's false. The next question is, eggplant, okra, and tomatoes are all fruits. So eggplant, okra, and tomatoes are fruits. So true or false? Okay, we'll have a look at what the results are. Okay, so 58% of you are saying that it's true. 42% of you are saying that it's not true. We'll look at the next question now. Diamonds are formed from the metamorphism of coal. So it's the compression of coal carbon to create diamonds. So again, true or false, diamonds are formed from the metamorphism of coal, which is pressure on carbon to create a diamond. True or false? And we'll have a look at what that response is. Okay, so 79% of you say that's true. 21% have responded as false. Okay, we'll go to the next question now. So seasons are caused by Earth's distance from the sun. So the Earth has an elliptical orbit. It's around the sun. It's not a perfect circular orbit. So the question is, seasons are caused by Earth's distance from the sun. Is that true or false? We'll have a look at the responses now. Okay, so 62% of you are saying that that's true and 38% of you are saying that's false. Okay, we'll move on to the answers. So that way you can see what was actually true and what was false. So the Great Wall is visible from space is actually false. So if we have a look at that one, Mount Everest is the tallest mountain from the base to the summit. That one's false as well. Giraffes are mammals that can't jump. That one's false. Eggplant, okra, and tomatoes are fruit. That one's actually true. Diamonds are formed from the metamorphism of coal, which is actually false. And seasons are caused by Earth's distance from the sun, which surprisingly is false as well. So have a think about the questions and how you've answered those questions and how many of those that you've got correct, whether you got all 6 correct or whether you got none correct or whether you got a mixture. And we'll have a look at some of the reasons as to why some of them are true and some of them are incorrect. So on the next slide, I'm going to show you an image, and this is an image taken from the International Space Station using a camera with a telephoto lens. So a telephoto lens is a zoom lens. And we're going to clear up the screen now a little bit because there's a little bit of haze from the clouds. And then so as we do that, you'll see the arrows where I've got indicated where the Great Wall of China is actually located. So as you can see, that's clearly not visible from space, particularly with the human eye. You need to have an apparatus that can zoom in. And even when you do zoom in, it's very, very difficult to even actually see where the location of the Great Wall is. On the next slide, I'm going to show you the facts around the tallest mountains from base to summit. So the key here is that Everest is the tallest from an altitude perspective, but we manipulated the question to talk about the height of the mountain from the base of the mountain to the summit. And Everest is not the highest from the base to the summit. Mauna Kea is actually the highest from the base to the summit. However, most of that mountain is actually submerged below sea level. So technically from an altitude perspective, Everest is the highest, but technically from the measurement of the base of the mountain to its peak, Mauna Kea is the highest. That's based in the Pacific, with Kilimanjaro coming in second and Everest coming in third. So the next slide, we'll look at mammals that can't jump. And the only mammals that can't jump are elephants, sloths, hippos, and rhinos as well. What's interesting is in the current digital age that we live in, If you have an image with a statement, research has shown that people are more likely to believe that statement if it's got an image that accompanies with it. So one of the things that we were looking to do was to manipulate you into thinking that because you've got an image of a giraffe and they are long and lanky, that the statement that they can't jump is actually correct when in fact it's actually false. On the next slide, I've got an explanation for you around diamonds. So diamonds are not actually formed from coal. So diamonds are actually formed from carbon, which is what everybody is taught. However, we make the linkage between carbon and coal in our minds. Diamonds are actually found in vertical pipes, which are formed from volcanic eruptions. And the carbon that they're actually formed from is dated as being older than land plants and when animals first appeared on the earth. Coal is also found in a horizontal sedimentary block, which again is further evidence that diamonds are not formed from coal. Rather, they're formed from volcanic pipes, sort of from high pressure of carbon in the center of the earth. On the next slide, we often think that seasons are caused by the elliptical nature of the Earth going around the Sun. However, it's got nothing to do with that elliptical orbit. It's actually got to do with the tilt of the axis of the Earth. So what's quite interesting is when the Earth is closest to the Sun, in the Northern Hemisphere, it's actually winter. So it's counterintuitive. So really seasons are caused by that axial tilt that you can see on the screen, and it really has nothing to do with the distance that the Earth is to the Sun. So what's quite interesting around that exercise is you can see that a lot of information can be manipulated and people can be convinced of selecting different sort of answers and reasons based on things that are learnt assumptions at school or are learnt social sort of common sort of practice where we might think that something is true when in fact the science behind it actually proves that it's false. What's interesting from looking at the numbers is that in general, as we moved through that exercise, we moved from a state where 79% of people believed something was true, in particular diamonds were from coal, when in fact that's actually incorrect. And in some cases, 60% of you believe that yes, the Great Wall is not visible from space, which is correct. What's interesting, the highest one that scored was that giraffes are the only mammals that can't jump. Most of you said that that was actually false, which was quite good. So what drives sort of human behavior in sort of the digital age is really we're living in an environment now where we're dependent on digital technology, we're connected to each other across social media and different platforms, and we really haven't evolved as a species to deal with the consequences of being continuously connected and using digital systems. So as a result, we are susceptible to manipulation, and we're also susceptible to intimidation, and that goes back to sort of our primitive brain around that fear response. So it's manipulation and intimidation that's often used by cyber criminals to force people to make choices that we wouldn't otherwise normally make. Some of the manipulation techniques that are used is the fear of missing out. So often people will receive a message saying that you need to action this immediately. If you don't action this immediately, there'll be consequences. And they'll also use the whole pressure of everybody else is doing this, so you should start doing this now. And often that'll be a quote of, 79% of people have benefited from this particular scheme, so you need to get in now to benefit from the scheme. The other challenge that we have with the online world is we seem to be more trusting of people on the internet than we really should be. And that's a strange phenomenon. So when we meet people face to face, we often use body cues to determine whether that individual should be trusted or not, and that's called micro expressions on people's face. Often within 10 seconds, we've made a judgment call as to whether that individual is trustworthy or not. Unfortunately, when we deal with people on the internet, we often can't see them, or the video that we're looking at them through is generally of a poorer quality, which doesn't allow those micro expressions to come through. As a result, we tend to be more trusting of people online than we really should be. The other thing that's used by cyber criminals is building rapport. So they'll try and build a rapport by, talking about the weather, talking about family and friends, asking questions about a particular restaurant that you might have attended. They'll do a lot of surveillance in terms of particular individuals and where they frequent, and they may start discussing about some of those sort of activities because they know some of your hobbies or some of your interests. They do that as a way of building trust and then use that as a mechanism to exploit you. The other aspect is putting forward a scenario where they may provide some assistance to you and then use that as a way to manipulate, to say, look, if I help you, I need you to help me out as well. And that's something that we see that's quite common. So at the end of the day, who are these hackers? And so, on the next slide, we've got the typical picture that the hacker is the individual with the hoodie on, who often sits in a basement, in a dark room on a computer. But in reality, if we move to the next slide, you'll see that, hackers are just like you and me. They could be anybody. They could be individuals that you work with. They could be family members. A number of hackers that really cause a lot of, problems are individuals who have day jobs, and hacking is really a sideline sort of activity for them as well. So on the next slide, what I've done is I've listed some of the different hacker categories that you can see. So we've got a range of different, threats that we need to be aware of from an online perspective. So you've got low risk, sort of what we call in the field threat actors. These low risk ones are what I'd term creative exploiters. They tend to do things and break systems more out of curiosity rather than being malicious. Some of the early inventors of Apple, for example, I would put in the creative exploiters category, where they were what they called phreakers or phone phreakers, where they learnt to manipulate the telephone system by using whistles to give free long distance telephone calls and things like that as well. So they weren't really after data to misuse that information or to steal information or to hold individuals to ransom. They were just really curious about exploiting systems for their own gain, or to understand how their systems really sort of function and work. The next sort of low risk hacker, I guess, you've got what we term script kiddies, and it's a bit of a derogatory term that's used in the industry. A script kiddie will typically be an individual who has downloaded some tool or information off the internet, and they're really just using that tool without full understanding of how that tool functions. They often lack programming skills, and so a lot of the things that they tend to really do is really defacing websites or being problematic. So you could consider them really as the vandals of the internet. So both, the creative exploiters and the script kiddies I would put in the low risk category. The next ones that you've probably heard about in mainstream media is hacktivism. Hacktivism is politically motivated. It ranges and it changes depending on the time or the political things that are occurring in society. So one of the very sort of famous hacktivist groups is a group called Anonymous, and it's a loose collection of individuals where you don't necessarily have a defined leader. As a result, they tend to attack different organisations or individuals based on what those individuals or organisations are doing at a particular time. As an example, Australia went through a period where we had a bit of a rough patch with Indonesia from a political perspective, and hacktivists from Indonesia started attacking Australian organisations. To get back at the government, they thought they would attack any organisation that had the word Commonwealth, National or Australia in it. And so effectively what ended up happening was a lot of organisations, like banks, for example, that have national in the title, like National Australia Bank or Commonwealth Bank, were victims of those hacktivists when in fact they had nothing to do with the political process. The next one that is increasing in significance of risk is terrorist organisations. So these are organisations that are obviously driven by ideology. Often it's religiously based. They don't yet have the technology to cause severe damage or to affect the way of life of Australian citizens. However, it is just a matter of time before they do become a significant threat. Now, the reason that I say that is terrorists can acquire the technology from other areas, like crime syndicates, which I'll talk about in a moment, but at the moment that hasn't happened, and so we're kind of relying on terrorists to build their own tool sets and implement their own attacks. But once they start to acquire that from criminal syndicates, we'll start to see terrorists become quite a significant threat from a digital perspective. So one of the areas that really probably impacts Australians the most, both from a business perspective and also from an individual perspective, are cybercrime syndicates or criminal syndicates. Criminal syndicates are very similar in structure to, what would have been the old sort of mafia type arrangement, where you generally have a head of a family or a leader. You'll tend to have a number of key individuals underneath who then run a diverse group of individuals, which are kind of the people on the street. Some of those people on the street, again, are everyday citizens that have day jobs but moonlight by providing services to criminal organisations. What's interesting is criminal organisations also have a very well-defined business structure. That structure is very similar to, I guess, legitimate businesses, where legitimate businesses will use outsourced services. That happens quite a lot in the criminal syndicate world as well, of cybercrime, where they're outsourcing services to different providers that provide specialty systems or services or labour to attack individuals. Just as an example, there is a group that provides services which is called mules. These mules are basically a labour force that can be shifted around the globe. They tend to fly people in and out of countries, and those mules, what they'll do is when they get a whole bunch of credit cards that have been stolen, the mules will actually use those credit cards on fake credit cards that they've created. They'll go to ATMs and instantaneously you'll have a whole bunch of mules, say for example in one state, going to a bank and all simultaneously using those fake cards to withdraw money from a whole range of accounts. So they're effectively a labour hire force where they'll convert the stolen information and cash that out from a monetary perspective. Now, from an outsourced perspective, the criminal syndicates really only see 30% of the money that's cashed out. 70% of that goes to the individuals or the mules, because that's quite a high risk activity. They often get caught, they're filmed, whereas the cybercrime bosses are often based in foreign countries that have laws that provide some level of protection or where there's no extradition. The other sort of really high risk area that businesses in particular need to consider is what I term the trusted insider. So the trusted insider you could break down into a number of groups. So you could break it down into the negligent individual, who is an individual that hasn't been properly trained, doesn't know the processes, and will make a mistake of some sort that publicly releases information. The next area that you've got would be the ethical insider. And there are quite a few examples of ethical insiders. So if you think about the Nixon era with the Watergate scandal, there was a gentleman called Mark Felt, and Mark Felt was the insider who publicly exposed the corruption that was occurring to the media. He was known during that period of time as Deep Throat. Today we have modern ones like Edward Snowden, Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning. So these are individuals who saw something that didn't gel with their ethical compass and thought that in the public interest it was important for that information to be disclosed. So they're the kind of modern examples of an ethical sort of insider. Now, it doesn't mean that what they've done is correct or right or wrong, but it just means that from a ethical and moral perspective, they saw something, it didn't gel with their sense or their belief of what was right and wrong, and so they felt that it was in the public interest to do something. Now, you know, that may be the case where that was a public good and we may see it as a public good in the future. However, some of the mechanisms that are used to do that do put people and individuals at risk. The other type of insider you've got is the malicious insider, and they're really motivated through greed and revenge. They tend to be individuals in organizations who believe that they're doing a really good job, that, you know, they're a fantastic person, they're a great asset to the company. However, in reality, they may be a poor performing individual. They may have been passed over for a promotion or missed out on a bonus. And as a result, those individuals will take it out on those organizations and will either release information or steal information as a way to get back to the organization. The other type of insider you've got is espionage. These are individuals that are either pressured by hacktivist groups, terrorist organizations, or crime syndicates, or they're individuals that have gotten to a point in their life where they've got an alcohol problem or a drug addiction, so they've got to find some way to pay for that, that component. Now, the other one that's probably of most significance and of most worry is cybercrime that's committed by government. And there are two sort of different broad aspects. You've got internal actions where governments are spying on their own citizens. Most governments around the world do this. You've got some governments that are using propaganda campaigns as well to control their populations. And then the other side you've got is governments attacking other countries. Now, they're either attacking other countries for a number of reasons. It's either for propaganda, to get a foothold to change the government policy or to claim territory. So a similar thing happened in Ukraine, for example, where the Russian government was using propaganda to incite a bit of a rebellion sort of within the country around the Russian individuals that were living in the Ukraine, as well as sort of the Ukraine nationals. And then as a result, you can destabilize an environment. And then as you destabilize an environment, you get rioting, you get sort of war sort of like conditions occurring, which means that it's very easy then to roll in the tanks and take control of a particular environment. The other area that a lot of governments use attacks on other countries is, you know, outside of spying, but also to steal intellectual property or information. You might kind of ask, you know, why is that important? So I'll give an example of a mining company. So a mining company, you know, the information that they have, you might say, is not that important. You know, really all they're doing at the end of the day is digging up ore out of the ground, shipping it to a centre to be put on a ship that then gets sent overseas for processing. However, the cost of doing that is highly sensitive and important. And if I'm in another country that might be buying that ore, for example, if I could get that information in terms of the cost of production to dig that ore out of the ground and to ship it, I now have a really good negotiation standpoint where I know how far I can drive them down from a cost perspective. So if they were trying to sell the ore to me at $60 a tonne, and I know that that ore is, you know, $20 a tonne to get out of the ground, I could quite easily push that company down to, you know, paying a price of $25 per tonne or $30 per tonne, rather than the $60 per tonne that they were after. The other sort of interesting about governments is if you look at North Korea, for example, North Korea is a sanctioned country. They've got no way to make revenue or to interact with the Western world or even sort of the Eastern sort of world. So what they'll do is they'll actually be the ones that are pushing forward with a number of scams to steal money from individuals or from different countries, the institutions within those countries. So a lot of the scams that we see are actually from countries or driven by countries like North Korea. North Korea also attacked a Bangladeshi bank and made off with $91 million in that attack as well. So if we just move forward slightly, I've highlighted sort of the ones that are driving sort of espionage, and then if we move forward again with the slide, you'll see the ones that I think are really of significant importance, both from a business perspective, a country perspective, and also from an individual perspective as well. So on the next slide, we're going to look at some common attacks and scams. So one of the common ones that you'll see on the next slide is a scam which relies on an individual to actually contact the scammers because you're tricked by using some very clever techniques where they haven't actually put anything malicious on your device. They're using what's called JavaScript to pop up a browser window, and that browser window looks very similar to, for example, an Apple site or to a Microsoft site, depending on the platform that you're using. And it'll often use a scare tactic to convince you to call a number, and that number changes quite often. In the visual example that I've got on the screen, you can see it's an 03 number. So they had detected that my machine was based in Victoria, so they were giving me a local number. Sometimes they'll actually provide a 1-800 number because they know as soon as you access that page, they'll know what kind of browser you're using, they'll know what kind of device you're connecting from, and they know the rough geolocation of your house or workplace in terms of that internet connection as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the message that would be normally heard over the speakers that you would encounter if you were tricked into going to that website. And what I should also point out too is some of the times they don't trick individuals by clicking on links to go to that website. Sometimes what they'll do is the adverts that you see on the sides of websites, one of the tactics for criminal syndicates is they'll buy advertising space, they'll run a normal advert, and then at some point they'll change that advert, which actually triggers the script that then creates the fake looking website. So I'm just going to play now the message that you'd hear. There's a couple things to sort of listen for. So you'll hear in the message that they quote an error ID. That error ID is very important, and I'll explain why afterwards. And have a listen to kind of the message that they're using and think about how you'd react if you heard that message as well.
Error number 268D3. Critical alert from Microsoft. Your computer has alerted us that it is infected with a virus and spyware. This virus is sending your credit card details, Facebook login, and personal emails to hackers remotely. Please call us immediately at the toll-free number listed so that our support engineers can walk you through the removal process over the phone. If you close this page before calling us, we will be forced to disable your computer to prevent further damage to our network.
So as you can hear, they were using an error code, and that error code is used for them to identify when you call what kind of campaign you were involved in. So they'll run multiple campaigns simultaneously from a call center, targeting different individuals around different countries. And so they'll use that error code to identify, okay, this is a campaign that was being run in Australia. It was for one around Microsoft, so we know it's a person using a Microsoft platform and not an Apple platform. So there's a number of sort of things that they'll use. You also kind of heard them using the scare tactic that if you don't call the number that's provided, they'll disconnect your machine. And a lot of individuals will actually fall for that because they believe that, this is a legitimate looking website. It looks very much like a Microsoft thing. When they try to close it in their browser, it doesn't close, it stays there. If they reboot their machine, it's designed in a way that as soon as their machine reboots, the web browser pops up again with that same sort of error message. The next clip that I'm going to play for you sort of gives you an example of what happens when you call the scammers back. And it's quite interesting that I've called multiple times just to give you an example of the different sort of voices and to show that these are fully fledged call centers that they're running.
All representatives are currently assisting other customers.
Thank you for calling. How can I help you?
Thank you for calling support. My name is Harry. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling. My name is James. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling support. My name is Alec. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling support. My name is Jack. How may I help you?
Thank you for calling support. This is Peter. How may I assist you?
So as you can hear, it's a diverse range of individuals, both male and female. And they do the whole nice thing of, all of our callers are currently busy, you're in a queue. So it adds to the legitimacy that, tricks people into thinking that they're actually talking to somebody from Microsoft. A lot of the times they're running these call centers out of India, Philippines, and a few other countries. So these are services that crime syndicates are actually using. They're fully operational and they're kind of available for anybody to purchase and use as well. I have another clip which I won't play, but in that clip I called, and what was interesting, as soon as you mention the word malware, they know straight away that this is somebody who's obviously got an understanding of how malware works, and they'll hang up on you. But if you ring up and you're playing the kind of, I don't know anything about computers, I've got this error message, they'll be extremely helpful in trying to solve the problem for you. If you quote the error code correctly, they'll look up on their internal systems the script that they need to follow. They'll then try and sell you a solution to fix the problem. They'll charge you anywhere between $300 to $1,000, and they'll ask for your credit card details. And at that point, that's when they've actually done two things. They've gotten money now out of your account, and then they've got your credit card information with some additional details that they'll then sell on to other people in the crime sort of world as well. If you don't quote the ID correctly, you put them into a little bit of a spin because now they don't know what kind of campaign you were involved in. So at this point, they then become extremely helpful and will start to ask a lot of other questions to try and identify what kind of machine you're using. They'll ask for your telephone number so that way if they get disconnected, they can call you back. They'll ask for additional information in terms of where you're based to try and understand, geographically what kind of things they could scam you out of. And then what they'll do is they'll use a public service that they've bought. So very similar to what you're connected to now from a webinar perspective. There's a thing called Go-To Support, and that's a commercial product that's available to a lot of organizations, and they'll actually purchase an account and then try and remotely connect to your device, and they'll talk you through how to set up the remote connection, and then their aim is to take control of your device and then to install malware, again, to get you to pay with credit card information and details, so that way they can extract finances and sell that card details on as well. On the next slide, we've got some information that's probably, the number one scam. So apart from tricking you by hijacking adverts and things like that, the number one way to really attack people is what they call phishing, farming, vishing, or schmishing. So the reason that they use this technique is because it works. So phishing, vishing, and smishing are techniques of sending a message to an individual and tricking that individual to either open an attachment, and that attachment will either contain some malicious content, or that attachment will contain instructions on connecting back to the criminals, where they'll have a fake website, etc. And again, to trick you to hand over information, money, etc. The other thing that phishing, vishing, and smishing also is aimed at doing is clicking on links that take you to websites where the website will either collect information So it'll take you through a whole process where you need to enter additional information, or that website will be engineered in a way where it automatically detects what kind of system you're using, the browser version, and it looks for what exploits are available in that browser, so that way they can push malware to your machine without you actually even clicking on anything else or doing anything. So it's the #1 way to attack individuals. It's also used by governments to attack organizations when you want to attack a foreign organization as well. And really it works very well. The reason that it works so well is a lot of the messages, again, are using that psychology of fear or fear of missing out or pressuring an individual where, you might get an email that says, if you don't click on this thing now, the Australian Federal Police will turn up and issue a warrant for your arrest, etc., and things like that to try and get you, scared and intimidate you to click on the link. The other challenge that we have is the technology that we're using today is really not helping the situation. So if you receive an email on your Mac or your PC and you're using Outlook, for example, it'll show you the from field as well as who the sender is. Now, it's very easy to forge the from field. Now, when you're using a device like a tablet or a mobile phone, the equivalent mail tool on that device, in order to save space because you've got limited visual real estate, will often drop some fields off. And as a result, you tend to see only the forged fields and not the underlying fields that you would normally see on a Mac or a PC, as an example. So, just by responding to an email, for example, you may think it has, an email has arrived from a work colleague or from a family member or from your children, when in fact it's been a forged email that's come from somebody else. So what are the kinds of information that they're after? So on the next slide, here are the kinds of things that they're looking to really extract from you, and that's your full name, usernames that you might use, email address, date of birth, tax file numbers, credit, debit card information, your home address, driver's license, Medicare number, place of birth, passwords, PIN numbers, your mother's maiden name, your first pet, first car, and passport details. And this information is really critical for them for a number of reasons. They may not ask for all of this information instantly, but they'll ask for different key components that they're looking for to either steal your identity or to take control of your accounts that you have on different services. So, they'll often ask for mother's maiden name, first pet or car, because a lot of banks and a lot of service providers will use that as your secret password to unlock an account that's been locked, or if you've forgotten your password as well. So on the next slide, I've got an example of a scam that has come in via email, and you can see if you sort of look very closely in this email, there's a difference between the sender and the actual email address. And so you can see in that email address that it's not actually from the Department of Human Services, but it's actually from a .com address. So if you were looking at this scam email, for example, on your mobile phone, you would not see that, and it would look like a legitimate email. The other kind of weird sort of signals that we see in this is they made a mistake where they left some of the ampersands and HTML coding that does what's called spacing, whereas you wouldn't normally see that in a proper government thing. They're using things that we've kind of trained the public around. When you see the padlock, things are safe when you see the padlock. So you can see they've used that padlock in the email message to kind of convince the recipient that this email is a secure email, so therefore it's safe to respond to. And you can see the range of information they're asking for. So your given names, date of birth, tax file numbers, and then a whole range of information down below, including driver's license and passport. So in this kind of scam, they would be collecting that information and selling that information on to other scammers as well. On the next slide, I wanted to kind of show you they can also use celebrities and media to kind of create fake news to convince people both either on a website or in an email that something is actually true when it's not. And they'll often use quotes to make it look real. They'll have things in there to try and convince you that, you know, there's easy money to be made, so the fear of missing out, you should get involved. They'll include images of the celebrities and again, create this whole sort of fear of missing out, so you need to participate or partake. On the next slide, some of the scams can actually be multi-step scams. So you might receive an email that's making initial contact. They've really harvested your email address. So in that blue stuff that's kind of pixelated, that's the email address that this particular scam was sent to. What they'll do is they'll ask you to click on the document, and that does two things. One, as soon as you click, it confirms that the email address at the other end is real and that there's a human there. And so now that email's become a bit more valuable. Two, by clicking on that, that could go to a particular web page, or it could open an attachment which attacks your machine. So let's have a look at what happens when you click in this instance. So on the next slide, when you click on that link, it actually takes you to a web portal. And that web portal very cleverly uses a lot of different web services, or pretends to be a lot of different web services. So, you know, whether it's Google's, an iCloud from Apple, or a Microsoft one, or Dropbox. So at this point, they don't really know what kind of cloud service you're using, but very cleverly, they're getting the individual to self-select a cloud service that they use to get access to this particular document that is ported to be in this cloud service. So in the next stage of the attack, when you click on one of the cloud services, it's now asking for your email address and password. So obviously they're looking for your login credentials to get access to that account. Now, interestingly enough, when you put in your login credentials, sometimes it'll work instantaneously, and what they're doing is they've now stolen that login credential and behind the scenes logged you into the legitimate service so that it all looks normal. In this particular instance, they weren't doing that. In this particular instance, they were just collecting and harvesting your information, and on the next slide, it takes you to a web page that then downloads a document from a bank called Chase, where they've then sort of blacked out certain things to make it look like a legitimate document, and they're pretending that this is a wire transfer, for example. Now, at this stage, in this scam, they've harvested your credentials, but they could have also gone one step further. The PDF that you download and open could actually contain malicious content, which would then install malicious software on your device, giving them full control of your machine as well. Other examples of scams on the sort of next slide. There's two examples that I've got here. One is they're using the whole thing of, you know, your mailbox is full, and so you need to upgrade your mailbox. And again, you could click on that link and it'll either take you to a malicious website, or they'll trick you into handing over credentials. And the other sort of example lower down on that page is, you know, there's a package from FedEx or a package from DHL or some sort of service provider like Australia Post, and you need to click here, very importantly, to view a message in your browser. So these are all kind of ways to trick you to interact and go to a malicious site, or hand over credentials and information, or basically download malicious content to your machine. On the next slide, there's a very sort of new and clever way of attacking individuals. So in this example, data breaches happen on a daily basis, and what tends to happen is individuals will use the same password from one site as well as another site. And so when you get a data breach, what happens is that information of your password is now in the public. So in this particular individual's case, what they've done is they've sent an email to that individual and highlighted the password that they're using, which is methyl 5-bromide. And so they're trying to create the illusion that they now have access to your accounts, that they've installed some malware on your machine, when in fact they haven't done that at all. They've just used information that they've found online from a data breach, and they've set up a whole scam, and using fear of blackmail that, you know, potentially they've filmed you doing some things, whether you've been naked in front of your laptop or your PC, and that if you don't provide a certain amount of Bitcoins by a certain period of time, they're going to release that information to your family and friends. Now, in this kind of example, this is, you know, truly just a blackmail scam. They haven't actually taken control of your webcam. However, there are instances where they can take control of your webcam and actually do secretly film individuals, but they'll provide a bit more evidence rather than just sort of your password to say that they've done this. On the next slide, I just wanted to kind of really highlight that you know, data breaches happen almost across every organization. You know, expect your information to be released at some point. So, you know, with some of these examples, you might have provided your home address, your postal address, your date of birth, your usernames, your passwords, and things like that. So expect that you will receive emails or scammers that are using that information to trick you into doing things. And really they want to collect more data and information so that way they can enrich the information they've got and pass it on to other individuals. So on the next slide, there's a great little website that you can use called Have I Been Pawned? Or pwned, and that website is run by an Australian, and if you go to haveibeenpwned.com, you can put in your email address and it'll actually show you which companies have actually lost your information and data. And as you can see, as of the 11th of October, you know, there's over 8 billion user accounts, bits of information that can be used on different individuals. On the next slide, one of the things that I'll just highlight very, very sort of quickly is another type of scam is what's called invoicing scam, and that's definitely on the increase. What hackers do and criminals do is they'll take control of somebody's email account. So they may have, for example, tricked you into clicking on a link. Now that you've clicked on that link, they've taken control of your email account or you've provided your email account details, and they will now send invoices to different companies that you interact with. Or fake bills saying that you know, this money needs to be paid, it needs to be paid now, or they'll manipulate invoices that if you run a business, they'll manipulate those invoices so that it doesn't actually contain your bank account details, it contains the scammers. And there have been instances of companies in Australia, you know, doing transfers of $3 million thinking that the money was going to a legitimate service when in fact it was actually going to a scammer's account. Okay, so let's keep moving along sort of, and we'll look at how to think like a hacker. So on the next slide, I want you to really sort of think about how would you break into a house? And this is really how hackers sort of think about attacking you as an individual or attacking organizations. So as we move forward in this slide deck, it'll start to build up sort of different things that you should think about. So, you know, when you look at a house, you really need to kind of determine what kind of alarms are in place, who's home. You look for patterns of behavior. You know, do they leave the bins out and things like that. And as we move forward again, I've kind of highlighted different things that will sort of build up on this deck that kind of illustrate different ways to attack a house. Now, this is no different to how you attack an individual or how you attack a business. With a house, for example, you could even break in, so you subvert systems, or I could turn up to the front door and I could be wearing a uniform and I could say, look, I'm from AGL or one of the power companies. We've seen some unusual spikes on your electricity meter. We're concerned that it's going to cause a fire in your house. I need to come in and just have a quick look around and check a couple of your points. And so if somebody turns up with a clipboard that looks like they've got an ID, they look like they should be, you know, the person from that company, most people will let them in. You know, even if they turn up and say, look, I'm here to change your globes to energy saving globes as part of a government initiative, that's a great way to get into a house as well. So, you know, that's that whole tactic of giving somebody something and using the reciprocal thing of, you know, I've helped you, so now help me by letting me in to do my job type of thing. Other things that you could do is, you know, clone the remote. You could steal the remote. You could wait for an opportunity for the door to open and sneak in. So there's a lot of different techniques that hackers use that, you know, are similar in terms of breaking into a house, whether you're going in directly, whether you're using a thing called social engineering to trick people into giving information, or you're exploiting flaws within existing systems, like with a lot of sliding windows. They have a flaw where you can jimmy them and lift them up and actually get in that way if people don't have secure locks on them as well. So on the next slide, so moving forward, you know, I wanted to really kind of highlight that information and data is the new oil in this digital age. And to think about all the information that you're kind of releasing and putting out there on the internet, because that information is, can be monetized and is actually worth a lot to different governments and criminal syndicates. So on the next slide, what I wanted to highlight is something that we're starting to see in society that's quite worrying. So there's this cyber-enabled information and influence warfare manipulation, and this is the rise of what we call deep fakes. And there's also a thing called a shallow fake. So a shallow fake is where, if somebody commits an incident in a particular country, hijacking that video footage and that messaging and distorting the truth around that and pushing that out through different social media platforms to convince the population of something that is actually fake, that it was actually true. A deep fake is where you've captured images of real individuals like politicians, and you've used a computer to generate a fake individual. And it's very easy to do that and have video footage now that looks like it's the real individual, the voice sounds like it's real, but the whole thing is actually fake, and they're using that as a way to discredit individuals or to make it look like certain individuals have said things they haven't. So CEOs, celebrities, and politicians are obviously in the line of fire for deep fakes. On the next slide, one of the kind of worrying things about all of this sort of information influence warfare that's coming about is most people these days get their news from social media. So in the US, for example, 68% of people get their news from these social media sites rather than the traditional media outlets like, The Age, Fairfax, etc., the Financial Times. So the worrying thing is that this information is often manipulated by cyber criminals or quite often foreign governments as well. On the next slide, what I wanted to kind of highlight here is, it's really important to think about information that you have has a monetary value. The information that you give up can be used as a weapon, either against you or others. And really the person that's got the most information these days is, organizations, governments, or individuals who then start to have the most amount of power. So when you look at services like Facebook, Facebook is a service where you as the consumer are the product, and what you do and say on Facebook and how you interact is actually being recorded and sold to organizations so they can target you for marketing purposes as well. So what are some of the tips and sort of tricks, I guess, and things to sort of be safe online? So on the next slide, I've kind of highlighted, some very high-level things. Trust less. Don't believe everything you read or see online. Don't click on links in emails or SMS. So SMS, phishing via SMS is called smishing, and a similar sort of thing by voice is called phishing. So, don't even trust things that look like they come from people you know. The reason being, it's very easy to forge an SMS. I can send an SMS that makes it look like it's come from one of your children or your spouse or from your work, and it'll actually appear in your normal SMS feed from that individual. So, again, don't believe something, have a code phrase or password with people that you love or care about. So at least that way, if you receive a message that says, help, I need you to do something urgently because I've lost my wallet and I need you to transfer money to a family friend, that, if it's not with that sort of code word that you've prearranged, then, that's definitely something that is a scam or an attack. Think twice before giving up information to anybody. Back up your information, your data. Definitely do not pay ransoms. At some point you can expect that you will make a mistake and click on something that will then encrypt your PC or your Mac and cause you to lose all your family photos and information. But if you have a backup of that information, you'll be able to restore that. Don't pay the ransom, because paying the ransom just helps to perpetuate the problem. Check your privacy settings on your phone, your browser, and the system that you use. Definitely don't use the same password across multiple internet sites. If that password is used, for example, on Facebook, LinkedIn, maybe your pizza orders, and then your Amazon shopping, if one of those sites is breached, the cyber criminals can now use that information to log into your account on any of those other services and take control of those services and make payments and things like that as well. Don't use passwords that can be guessed easily. Make them a little bit more cryptic. Don't connect cables and devices from other people to your phone. So one of the new tricks is cables can actually contain malicious commands that can be remotely triggered. So the cable looks like a normal charging cable and it will charge your phone, but as soon as you plug it into your device, will actually trick your device into connecting to a website that then loads malware onto your device, giving the cyber criminals, the governments, full control of your device. So again, it's very important not to connect or share things with people you don't know. And even with people that you do know, because they may not have the same level of, I guess, sort of cyber hygiene, if you like, as yourself. So that brings us to the conclusion sort of for me and gives us a little bit of time for some questions. Sam, I'll hand back to you if there are sort of any questions that people would like to ask.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Damien. And there was so much content there. We've actually sort of gone to the end of our allotted time, but if people can hang around, if they want to ask some questions, please type your questions into the question field you'll see on your screen, and you can click submit. And we'll get to as many as we can in a short while, and then just do send them through, and Damien might have some time to respond to some via email if we don't get to them. So there was one that came through as we were going, and the question was, what are your thoughts on the voice ID recognition system that the ATO has implemented? Would you say it's safe?
So the ATO with the sort of government system, there's a number of different techniques that they use to kind of improve security. So they're using sort of, multi-factor, and some government agencies are now using biometrics as well. Biometrics can be tricked, sort of the audio biometrics. Cyber criminals now with deep fakes can actually record enough of your voice to actually trick a system where the system might ask you for, say your date of birth, say the address, etc., and they can actually replay that back. Multi-factor authentication is hugely important. Like, for example, with the ATO sending you an SMS every time you log into MyGov. One thing to be conscious of, though, however, is cyber criminals adapt very quickly. So one of the things that they can do is they can actually clone your phone. When they clone your phone, they then also receive your SMSs. So that's another technique that they're using as well. Some scammers will actually try and port your number to a new phone provider, so that way there'll be a period of time where your phone you think is working normally, but in fact they've actually ported it to a handset that they've got, and they're now receiving all your calls and SMSs.
Right, thank you. And again, please do send any questions through if you've got them. Now's the time. Don't be shy. Just send them through the questions portal. We've had a few come through. From Stephen, if you get a fake message, say that Microsoft warning not to turn off your computer, how do you stop this message reoccurring? Can you delete it?
So you can, if you start your computer in safe mode, because what tends to happen is they've modified the browser setting and made that page the home page. So sometimes you can go into like a safe mode. You could even try and, if you do Control-Alt-Delete on a Microsoft platform, for example, you may be able to get to Task Manager and kill that service, for example, if it was in Firefox or Chrome. What you'd then have to do is uninstall the application, that particular browser, and then reinstall it from scratch. Some of the other things that you could do if you're using Firefox, there's a great little tool that you can download called NoScript, and NoScript is a plugin that actually blocks JavaScript. Now, the con side of it is a lot of websites will then use JavaScript to enhance the look and feel of a website, but at least it gives you protection where you could say you're going to an untrusted site you've never been to before. You can block all JavaScript, make sure that it looks okay, or you get the information that you need. And then it also helps to stop tracking of where you're browsing by a lot of other websites that then sell that content on to marketing firms.
Right, thanks. The question came in from Rose asking if now, should I be concerned about some of my business cards that were stolen recently?
Definitely, because what they'll do is they'll, tend to use that information on the business cards, because now they've got your email address, your full name, they'll have your mobile number. Sometimes they could use that business card to pretend to be you. And then they'll use that as a way to scam other people out of information. One of the tactics that they'll use sometimes with scamming is they'll send messages to people, and it'll be from a particular phone number, or they'll dial people from a particular phone number. So if you call somebody, you can fake the caller ID. So you think you're talking to that particular individual when in fact you're not talking to them at all. And I did come across an elderly lady who, they faked her number and used her number, and on the caller ID it said it was the ATO office calling, but it had her home number. And as a consequence, she got thousands of phone calls of people abusing her and yelling at her. And this was an elderly lady that had nothing to do with the scam at all. It's just a random chance that they used her details.
How unfortunate. Question from Papari, who asks, if we find our email is breached on the website you mentioned, what should we do?
So make sure that you have changed the passwords across all the different services that you use on the internet. You may want to consider getting a password manager, which is some software that can basically help you have really complex passwords, and you just need to know one password to access the password manager that then helps you log into all these other services. Another thing, if you don't want to buy a password manager, what some people do is they'll have a password that they use on sort of generic sites that they don't care if somebody gets hold of, because that site doesn't have any information, they can't purchase anything. And then as their banking sites will be a different password, and maybe other sites that they use for online shopping will again be a different set of passwords as well. But it's good to be aware of what information has been stolen about you. And that way, that kind of helps you sort of prepare for when somebody's asking you questions or sending you an email, you start to become a bit more suspicious about, okay, so I know they're approaching me because they've got already this information. They're trying to get additional information because now that adds value to that data that can then be sold on for somebody else to then attack you in a different way.
Right, thanks. A question from Neil says, I run a printing business and get files every day on USB. How can I avoid this?
Very, very difficult. So one of the things with your printing business is you need to be conscious that when you use a device, that device could have malware on it embedded either in the PDF or the Adobe file or in another mechanism. And I've seen some companies set up what they call a sacrificial PC or sacrificial device, where they'll plug the content into that device. If that device basically gets malware on it or gets wiped for whatever reason, it doesn't impact their production systems. And then they can often transfer that file using that device through a web service. There are different websites where, so there's a website called VirusTotal, and VirusTotal, you can upload a copy of the file as well if you're using it on a sacrificial machine, where it'll tell you whether there's any embedded malware or whether that's suspicious. Now, even if that comes back and says that that file's not suspicious, you'll find that those websites might catch 80% of suspicious files, but there's an interesting stat where malware tends to only be used once for a majority of the time. So only 40% of the time does malware tend to be reused. So it's quite interesting that malware tends to be specifically engineered to target specific individuals or a group of individuals. But yeah, definitely would recommend, have good backups in place for your production systems, have a plan if something happens, and use a sacrificial machine where you could plug something in it and run, the latest sort of antivirus and scanning tools. For that device, you'd have to go a bit beyond just AV. You can buy what they call EDR, which is it uses a combination of behavioral and cloud-based services, where it's kind of crowdsourcing, where if that device contained malware, hopefully it's been picked up or seen by somebody else out in the world, and so you kind of benefit from that as well.
Thank you, and that answers another question that had come in about antivirus software. So you would recommend the EDR that you mentioned, would you?
Yeah, definitely. So antivirus really, at the end of the day, antivirus is probably only about 40% to say 55% effective. It's very easy. Like there's an outsourced service where criminal syndicates can say to somebody, look, can you engineer a piece of malware for me? I want that malware to be undetectable for the next 2 months. And then what they do is they pay money into an escrow account, and then that malware producer will only get their money if they meet that service level agreement. And so they're incentivized to very rapidly, and they can change malware within about 5 minutes so that it's undetectable again to antivirus. And that's because antivirus uses a signature, whereas EDR software tends to use a bit more of a heuristic thing where it's looking for weird things that that application might be trying to do, like, is it trying to write into a file space that shouldn't normally be accessed, or are there spelling mistakes in the executable or the application, because that's an indication that it was developed using non-standard software development techniques as well.
So thank you once again, Damien, for your time. We really appreciate it, and thank you to all our alumni and friends for tuning in today. It's fantastic to have you here, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks very much.